Welcome back to the channel. And this week I featured the most action-packed vlog I've ever released and playing the biggest pot of my life. So make sure you stay till the end. I mentioned in my previous vlog that at the beginning of last week, I was at risk of booking my first losing year ever because we were sitting dead even for the year 2024. But after playing 2 sessions last week, we profited $842 in less than 8 hours of play, so our hourly win rate skyrocketed to $2.91.
I don't know how to put this, but I'm kind of a big deal.
That's the equivalent of the federal minimum wage back in the year 1979. To give you guys some perspective on how long ago that was, Sony released the Walkman.
The Walkman is a tiny stereo cassette player with truly incredible sound. The Walkman from Sony, the one and only.
And Rocky Balboa finally beat Apollo Creed to win the heavyweight championship of the world in the most dramatic fashion possible. But to get back to the year 2024, we're going to have to hit a major upswing to get our hourly win rate up to today's minimum wage. So let's see what we could pull off. We head out to the most action-packed card room in Sacramento, which is none other than Capital Casino. But before we dive into this week's hands, let me just quickly announce that I'm hosting a meetup game on the Club GG app and giving away $100 to the highest stack at the end of the night. Sign up using my reference code if you want in. We buy in for our usual $500 starting stack, and action gets started right away after we get dealt the most hated hand by every poker player over the age of 70, which is none other than Ace-King offsuit. We raise it up to $35 over a weak $7 open and take it down right away. But one thing I notice is most stacks are huge at this table, so I immediately reach into my wallet and add on $500 to match the action players, so I'm into the game for $1,000 right away. This next hand is a wild one. One of the tightest players at the table opens the action to $15 off a short stack in the cutoff, and the small blind puts in the call. I look down at King Queen of Spades and usually 3-bet in this spot, but I have a feeling I'm behind the cutoff's opening range. The straddler calls as well, so we're going 4 ways to a flop of Ace-7-6 with 2 spades, giving us the nut flush draw. We all check to the cutoff, who now throws out a C-bet of $25. Action's on the small blind, who now check raises to $125. This specific player in the small blind isn't afraid to get involved in big pots, and since the cutoff only has $100 left in his stack, he could be doing this with a ton of different holdings. He could have an ace, straight draw, flush draw, or combo draw since he's an action player. I'm just under $1,000 effective with the small blind, so with future implied odds, I decide to put in the cold call since the cutoff doesn't have enough to re-raise. The straddler folds, and the cutoff goes in the tank. He eventually decides to fold, and I honestly think he had a big ace since he's never c-betting kings or queens on that flop, and then tanking on a decision for only $100 more. So keeping that in mind, we go to a turn with $335 already in the pot, and it peels off the 10 of diamonds, giving us additional outs to Broadway. The small blind does something I definitely wasn't expecting, and now slows down and checks. I've played with him a ton in the past, and he's been known to trap with really good holdings. He could have easily been semi-bluffing with 8-9 on the flop that now made a straight. He could still have us beat with an ace, or he could have a smaller flush draw that we have in terrible shape. So given all those scenarios, I decide to check it back and see a free river, which comes out the amazing 5 of spades, giving us the nuts.
Gives it back to Rush. Deep shot! Get it! What a perfect ending!
Now our opponent throws out 7 green chips for a bet of $175, and I'm doing backflips in my head. I think we could take all his aces and 2 pairs off the table because this is a terrible run out for those that I doubt he'd bet. So he probably either has a straight or a flush and nothing else. I have about $850 left in my stack, and I'm just thinking about the size I want to raise to. I think an all-in would be way too much, and a min click to me looks too much like the nuts. So I eventually settle on a sizing of $580, which seems like the most polarizing size possible. He goes in the tank for over a minute, and eventually turns over his hand, which is 4-3 of spades for the smaller flush. He's debating on what to do, and at this point I'm hoping he puts in the call, but but he eventually settles on a very disciplined fold. It sucks he happened to have the smallest flush possible, or else I definitely think we would have gotten paid. But I'm never complaining when we scoop in a pretty sizable pot to start our day. This next hand up is a prime example of knowing your opponents. A player in early position opens to $16 and next to act 3 bets to $50. Action gets folded to me in the big blind and I look down at the ladies, pocket queens. Unlike what you see on Hustler Casino Live, in low stakes, when you see an early position raise and then the player next to act 3 bet, it's almost always jacks plus and ace king. So instead of 4 betting, I decided to just put in the cold call for $50 and the early position player calls as well. We're going 3 ways to a flop with 150 in the middle, either looking for a queen or a super low flop. But that's not what we get when the dealer throws out a board of King 9-8 Rainbow. Me and the early position player both check and flow, and action gets checked around. But I still feel like I'm behind given the setup. So when the turn pairs the board with the 9 of spades, I check again and the first early position player now bets for $75. The 3 better calls, and I know for sure that I'm beat, so I snap fold. Even though I folded, we keep the camera rolling just to prove my point. River peels off the jack of hearts and the first player bets $125. Now the second player min clicks it to $250. The first player puts in the call and the 3 better shows pocket kings for top boat. So knowing what your opponent's pre-flop ranges are can save you piles of money in the long run. We unfortunately went card dead for the next hour, and the seat across from me opened up and had better lighting, so I took advantage of it. In our first interesting hand at the new seat, 2 limps to me in the small blind, and I look down at the Cowboys, pocket kings, and raise them up to $30. I didn't want to go small since I'd be in the worst position possible the entire hand, and surprisingly both limpers put in the call. So with $90 in the middle, the flop comes out 9-8-3 Rainbow, which seems like a pretty good flop for my specific holding. So I go ahead and throw out a nice little value bet of $40, and just the player in middle position puts in the call. Pot's up to $170 now, and the turn peels off the 7 of hearts, which I definitely wasn't a fan of. 7-8 makes 2 pair, the obvious straight draw gets there, and this card is just a lot better for our opponent's range. So I slow down and check, and luckily he checks it back, which almost guarantees I have the best hand. River is the 4 of hearts, bringing in the backdoor flush. Now I think a hefty value bet is in order. My check on the turn looks super weak, so I size up to $125 targeting hands like 10-9 or ace-9, but he snap folds and says that he missed. Missed what? No clue, but either way I'm fine with scooping in this pretty decent pot. The specific table really died down since the morning, so I decided to implement something I've been slacking on all year, which is the table change when I have the chance. I think it's a very underutilized advantage you could give yourself each poker session, so make sure to go where the money is. So I joined the new table in hopes of getting more action, and action is what we got. In our first hand at the new table, a player in early position opens the action to $15 and 3 people put in the call. Folds to me in the big blind and I look down at 10-9 of diamonds. If we were super deep, there's definitely merit to putting in the squeeze with such a playable hand, but I decided to take the low variance route and just stick in the call. Going 4 ways to a flop of 9-8-7 with 2 hearts, giving us top pair and an open-ended straight draw. I check and flow, and action gets checked all the way to the button, who bets $45. I'm not trying to overplay my hand in such a multi-way pot, so I just stick in the call, and now the original raiser thinks 45 isn't enough and goes all in for 115 total. Action folds back to the button, who decides to fold for only $70 more, which I was shocked by. But I'm never folding this combo draw, so I put in the chips and turn over my hand like I always do when I'm all in. There's no more action, so we go to a run out. The turn comes out the ace of diamonds, which I absolutely hated, and the river was the 4 of hearts. My opponent says he missed and mucks his hand, later telling me he had queen 10 offsuit for the open ender. But I'm fired up because the table change paid off and we scoop in our first pot at the new table. Thank you. The $6 straddle is on for this hand and one player limps in early position. A new player that just sat down at the table raises to 30 and I look down at ace king of clubs. We give him a welcoming gift with a 3-bet to 105. Folds back to him, and he jams his total stack of 220, and we snap call. I turn over my hand like I always do when I'm all in, and he shows ace king of hearts. The flop gives us a major sweat when it comes out 9-6-3 with 1 heart. Turn is a 7 of hearts, bringing 2 hearts on the board. Now I'm thinking of all the bad things I've done this past week to deserve this. But luckily the river peels off a blackjack and we fade a horrible bad beat that would have definitely put us on tilt. Fading that river might be a sign that the upswing is coming. The same player we just chopped it with opens the action to $21, and I look down at ace jack of hearts in the $6 straddle. Could 3-bet, but the only info I have is from the ace king hand, so until I see otherwise, I'm going to label him as a tight player. So I just put in the call, and the flop comes out jack 8-7 all clubs, giving us top pair, top kicker. I check and flow, and now he down bets to $15. This bet represents 2 things. He either has a nutted hand that doesn't want to scare me away, or he has a combo draw that wants to see a cheap turn. And if that's the case, we gotta get our value now and punish him for betting so small. So I value raise to $45, and he quickly calls. I think I have the best hand more often than not, so the pot is now sitting at $130, and the turn is probably the worst card in the deck with the 6 of clubs, giving any single club holding a flush and downgrading my top pair. So I slow down and check, and luckily our opponent checks it back. River pairs the board in the 6 of spades, and I don't see what I could get value from, so I check again, and our opponent checks it back. I turn over my hand, and he shows 9-8 offsuit with a 9 of clubs for the winner. Sucks that I didn't have the info that he opens wide previously, or else I definitely would have put in the value 3-bet pre-flop. For the next 30 minutes, we got dealt ace-king suited in both the club and heart varieties, but somehow managed to lose both times, which led us to 2 o'clock, which is when we always leave. So off to the outro.
Gotta love it when your good hands hold up and you're not put in any tough spots. In for $1,000 and out for $1,400 even for a solid $400 win to start the week. Hope day 2 goes just as smooth.
Day 2 was probably the wildest session of my life, and it got off to a horrible start. Someone at the table didn't want me to film the vlog despite only me showing my hole cards, so instead of causing a scene, I politely obliged and wait till one of us got moved to the main game. But to break down what happened in the first 30 minutes, I lost with trips to a straight, flopped top pair top kicker but lost to a turn set, then 3-bet ace king and got a terrible run out. So we started day 2 by being stuck just under $300 in less than 30 minutes, but got a little back with ace jack of spades in a small pot. But it wasn't looking pretty until we got to our first recorded hand of the day where I'm in the big blind and look down at the ladies, pocket queens. There was an early position open to $15 and 2 people put in the call, so I throw in the 3-bet to $85. We got action from the original raiser and the first caller, so the pot is sitting at $270 already and we haven't even seen a flop. We're hoping for a good one, and that's exactly what we get when it comes out Queen 9-6 Rainbow giving us the nuts. Flopping the nuts is hard enough, but to get them in a 3-bet pot with the betting lead is unheard of. If this was heads up, I'd probably check, but since we have 3-way action and I'm out of position, I don't want to give up the betting lead and see it get checked through. So I throw in the same bet of $85, and the original raiser calls, which I love to see, and now the field caller goes all in for $286 total. I try to keep my composure in Hollywood for a second before eventually putting in the call, hoping to string along the other player, and luckily he calls as well. So the pot is sitting at $1,128, and we still have some money to play for. Turn is a complete blank and the 3 of hearts completing the rainbow, and we have a little less than $500 left in my stack. I could jam, but I think all his draws could easily fold, and that would be a nightmare. So I downbet to $150, hoping to keep him in the pot with his entire range, and once again he quickly puts in the call. The pot has now ballooned to $1,428, and the river peels off the 5 of clubs. Not the best river in the deck because I no longer have the nuts, but if he has 7-8, then so be it. I go all in for $357, and we fade the snap call, so I know we have the winner. Our opponent seems like he's in a tough spot, but he says that for this price, he can't fold and eventually sticks in the call. I turn over the ladies, and he shows ace-queen offsuit for top pair top kicker, and the other opponent showed pocket kings for the overpair in this insane cooler. We managed to hit a one-outer to scoop in the biggest pot of my life. I just have one thing to say.
Tell them to bring me my money.
So after a horrible start to the day, we got blessed by winning the biggest pot of our lives, and we go from being stuck $130 to being up over $1,200 in just one hand. Next hand up, the $6 straddle is on, and a player in early position raises to $25. 3 people in the field put in the call, and I look down at pocket fours and call as well. Going 5 ways to a flop with 125 in the middle, and the dealer throws out an amazing board of king queen 4 with 2 spades, giving us bottom set. I check and flow, and the original raiser continues the aggression for a half pot bet of $60. A player in middle position calls, and action gets folded to me. I'm over $1,500 effective with the original raiser and $600 effective with the middle position player, so I throw in a value raise to $175. The reason I only went 3x is I didn't want to lose a weak top pair, but still wanted to charge all their draws. The original raiser decides to fold, which I was fine with because he's the only one that could have pocket kings or pocket queens given the action. So I'm 100% certain I have the best hand now, especially after the middle position player just calls. So the pot is already sitting at $535, and in my head I'm thinking this player either has a king, jack 10, or a ton of flush draws and not much else. So we go to a turn looking for a clean one, but it peels off the 6 of spades, bringing in the front door flush. I think betting here would be a huge mistake for 2 reasons. 1, if he has a flush, then I'm putting money in a pot that I'm behind in. And 2, if he just has a king or jack 10 for the straight draw, he's probably not calling a bet. So I go into check evaluate mode, but surprisingly he checks it back. This is pretty good info because we could take flushes off the table since he'd probably bet all of those in position, so he's only left with a king or jack 10 in my opinion. We're obviously ahead of those holdings, so we're looking to fade a spade, 9, or ace on the river. But unfortunately the river peels off the hideous 10 of spades. This board is as ugly as possible, so there's no way in hell I could go for value and get called by worse. So I check again, and luckily he snap checks it back. I reluctantly turn over my set, and he shows king 9 of diamonds for a weak top pair. I like the way I played and analyzed this hand, just got an unfortunate run out. But no complaints here as another sizable pot gets pushed in my direction. Our stack has officially crossed the $1,500 profit mark, but we're only a couple hours into the session and have till 2 o'clock to try and pull off the biggest win of my life. This is the most chips I've ever had on the table at once, so let's try and keep this momentum going. The action folds to me in the cutoff, and I look down at the polarizing ace-king offsuit and raise it up to $15. Both a small blind and big blind put in the call, so we're going 3 ways to a flop in position with $45 in the middle. Flop comes out ace-jack 10 rainbow, giving us top pair top kicker with the gut shot to Broadway. I was expecting the action to go check check, but that's not what happens because the small blind leads out for a $25 bet. Unless you're playing a super aggressive opponent or a complete fish, alarm bells should be going off in your head when someone takes this line on such a connected board. Most players don't donk into the pre-flop aggressor with a hand like ace deuce or ace 3, so the range I'm putting her on is ace queen at minimum, or a lot of 2-pair hands like jack 10 or ace 10 not wanting to get it checked through. So after the big blind calls, I decide to play it cautious and just put in the call as well. Going 3 ways to a turn, which comes out the 8 of diamonds, which shouldn't really change anything. The pot is up to $120, and the small blind isn't messing around because she throws in a massive bet of $100. I doubt ace queen would take this sizing against 2 opponents, so after the big blind folds, I flash her an ace and reluctantly toss my hand in the muck. She shows an ace as well, and I offer her $5 to show the other card since I was convinced I was beat and I just wanted to prove it to you guys. And she reveals ace-jack offsuit for top 2 pair.
Whoop, whoop.
For this one, action gets folded to us in the hijack, and I look down at King Queen offsuit and open the action to $15. Folds to the blinds who both put in the call, so we're going 3 ways to a flop in position and get an above average flop of King 7-7 rainbow, giving us top pair second best kicker. They check and flow, and on this board I'm either way ahead or way behind. What I mean by that is I'm 100% certain neither player has aces or ace kings since they didn't 3-bet pre-flop. So either I have a hand that is so far ahead I can only get value by other kings, or I'm way behind trip sevens. So when that's the case, I'll check it back to either let them catch up or check for pot control if I'm way behind. We go to a turn which comes out the 6 of hearts, and now the small blind leads out for $25. Big blind calls, and the only play here is to call. Raising is out of the question because he either has us beat, value betting a worse king that will probably fold to a raise, or bluffing with air, which we want him to continue doing. So we go 3 ways to a river with 120 in the middle, and the river peels off the jack of spades. Not the best card in the world because one of the few value hands we were beating was king jack that now has us beat. But when our opponent only bets $50 and the big blind folds, I think we've under-repped our hand too much to fold, so I happily make the call, but our opponent shows 7-8 offsuit and completely owns our soul. Just glad I checked back the flop and didn't overplay our hand. We flopped top pair in the last 2 hands, but still managed to lose both pots, so we're down $200 from our high point. But what better way to get out of the slump when we get dealt the best hand ever created in pocket aces? Folds to the button who opens the $15, and the small blind puts in the call. Never flatting here, especially when we're over $1,500 effective with the button, so I throw in the 3-bet to 58. Only the original raiser puts in the call, so we're going heads up to a flop out of position to a 9-7-6 2-diamond board, giving us the overpair on a very connected board. This runout definitely favors our opponent's range, and he's a solid player that could put me in a lot of tough spots with just one pair on a board like this. So I decide to check, not only for pot control, but it's also important to check back some strong hands and stay balanced. He checks it back, and the turn comes out the queen of diamonds, bringing in the front door flush. I'm pretty confident this opponent would have semi-bluffed with a flush draw in position, trying to get me off a hand like ace-king or ace-queen, so I'm not worried about him having one. And since that's the case, I size up to $80, but he folds right away. The $6 straddle is on for this hand, and I look down at 9-7 of diamonds in the big blind. Folds to the small blind who just puts in the call, and I decide to call for $3 more since I'm already in for 3, and the straddler checks their option. Flop comes out king jack 8 all diamonds, giving us the flush and a redraw to the straight flush. Small blind starts off with the check, and I throw in a pot-sized bet to $10. Straddler folds, and the small blind puts in the call right away. Turn shouldn't change anything in the 6 of clubs, and the small blind checks again. I think betting pot is the only play here. We might lose value from the weaker pairs, but it's important to target his top pair hands and all his holdings containing the naked ace of diamonds. So I throw out a bet of $35, and he calls once again. Pot is now up to $100 even, and the river is the biggest blank in the deck and the deuce of spades. He checks for a 3rd time, and I throw out a bet of $90, but he snap folds. By the way he played it, and snap folded the river, I think he most likely had the ace of diamonds in his hand. Got a little back with that hand, which got our stack back up to $2,400, but for the next hour we went card dead and folded everything. But this next hand, there's one limp in early position, and I look down at the beautiful ace-queen of clubs and raise it up to $20. Folds over to the small blind, who now 3-bets to 90. Limper folds, and action's back on me. If this was offsuit, I would just snap fold it, because 3-bets from the small blind against an early position open are usually a very strong range. But since we're over $1,500 effective and I have position, I put in the call. Flop comes out 10-8 deuce rainbow with no club, and he throws out a continuation bet of $80. If there was a club on this board, I could easily continue with 2 overs and a backdoor straight and flush draw, but there isn't one, so I toss my hand in the muck. Our opponent must have figured out the biggest secret in poker because he turns over pocket jacks and scoops in the pot. Didn't think it was possible to win with that hand. Unlike the last couple weeks where we won damn near every bomb pot, this week was the complete opposite because we missed every flop worse than Jordan Poole shooting a wide open layup.
Nice return back. Jordan Poole, that's a tough sequence.
For our next interesting hand, I actually got folded to the hijack who opened for $15 and both the cutoff and button put in the call. I'm in the small blind and look down at pocket nines. I raised to $75 and just the hijack puts in the call. So we're going heads up out of position with 180 in the middle, and we don't get the best flop in queen jack 4 with 2 spades giving us third pair. I think it's important to bet your entire range on this board rather than check and give up. So I throw out a $55 continuation bet and he puts in the call. I think his range is still pretty wide because he probably calls with all his pairs, putting me on a hand like ace king. So keeping that in mind, we go to a turn which comes out the 3 of diamonds. Now I think I could check evaluate the turn to see what he does. He checks it back, which I was pretty happy to see. River peels off the 4 of clubs pairing the board, and I really don't see a point in betting. So I check again, and luckily he checks it back. I turn over my third pair, and it's good after our opponent tosses his hand in the muck. We played for another hour and picked up some amazing holdings that could either win or lose you a ton of money, but they surprisingly were all involved in small pots and we basically broke even on them. So off to the outro.
Almost forgot how fun poker is when everything works out. In for 1,000 and out for 2420 for my biggest win since January of $1,420. Wouldn't mind if this heater continues indefinitely.
As for this week in poker, we played exactly 8 hours on the dot and booked an insane profit of $1,820, which comes out to an hourly win rate of $227.50. Feels good to finally book a massive win for the week, and for once I feel pretty good with how I played. I feel like my confidence is increasing since I have a better handle with my bet sizings, and I think I'm ranging my opponent's hands a lot better as well. So that brings our yearly profit to $2,672 for an $8.88 hourly win rate, which is what the minimum wage was in 2014. That same year, Travis Ishikawa had one of the most insane walk-offs I've ever seen to win the pennant and eventually help the Giants win their last World Series trophy.
This Ishikawa hits one into right. The Giants win the pennant.
So we're a lot closer to getting our hourly win rate to 2024 minimum wage, but we just got to keep improving each week and do what Al Davis said best.
Swim, baby.
Thanks for watching, and as always, I hope you guys run good at the table, and I'd appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button to help me reach my new year-end goal of 10,000 subscribers.